The fever had stolen everything from her except consciousness, and Grace Caldwell wondered if even that would vanish by morning as she pressed her burning cheek against the rough wooden floor of the boarding house, too weak to climb back into bed. The summer heat of 1878 pressed down on Pecos, Texas, like a wool blanket, and inside Grace's small rented room on the second floor of Mrs. Henderson's establishment, the temperature felt unbearable. Sweat soaked through her thin cotton nightgown, plastering it to her trembling body as another wave of chills contradicted the fever burning through her veins. She had been sick for 3 days now, each one worse than the last, and this morning she had finally admitted to herself what she had been denying since the fever started. She needed a doctor, but the $7 in her worn leather purse would not cover both the medical bill and next week's room and board. Grace had come to Pecos 6 months ago after her father died, leaving behind nothing but debts and a small farm that the bank claimed faster than she could pack her few belongings. At 22 years old, she found herself alone in the world with no family, no home, and skills that seemed useless in a harsh frontier town. She had taken work as a seamstress, mending clothes and making simple dresses for the women of Pecos. The pay was meager, barely enough to cover her room, meals, and fabric supplies. There was nothing left over for emergencies, and certainly nothing left for illness. Her body convulsed with another coughing fit, each hack feeling like it might tear her lungs apart. When the spasm finally subsided, Grace tasted blood on her lips. Terror gripped her then, cutting through the fever haze. She was getting worse, not better. If she did not see a doctor soon, she might not survive to worry about rent money. With tremendous effort, Grace pulled herself up using the bedpost, her arms shaking with the exertion. The room spun sickeningly around her, and she had to pause, breathing hard, waiting for her vision to clear. She needed to get downstairs, needed to ask Mrs. Henderson for help, though she knew the older woman ran a business, not a charity. Still, perhaps she could work out some arrangement, some way to pay back the cost of medical care. Grace had barely taken 2 steps toward the door when her legs gave out completely. She crumpled to the floor with a soft cry, lacking even the strength to break her fall properly. Pain shot through her shoulder where she hit the hard boards, but it felt distant compared to the fire consuming her from within. Tears of frustration and fear slipped down her fevered cheeks as she lay there, helpless. She must have lost consciousness then, because the next thing Grace knew, someone was pounding on her door, the sound echoing through her skull like thunder. "Miss Caldwell! Miss Caldwell, are you in there?" Mrs. Henderson's voice carried worry beneath its usual stern tone. "You did not come down for breakfast, and you missed picking up the dress order from Mrs. Patterson. She is not pleased." Grace tried to call out, tried to tell Mrs. Henderson she needed help, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. She attempted to speak louder, but another coughing fit seized her, leaving her gasping and weak. The door handle rattled. "Miss Caldwell, I am coming in." The door swung open, and Mrs. Henderson stood framed in the doorway, her round face creased with concern as she took in the sight of Grace collapsed on the floor. "Sweet mercy, child!" She rushed forward, her considerable bulk moving with surprising speed as she knelt beside Grace. The older woman's cool hand pressed against Grace's forehead, then jerked back as if burned. "You are burning up. How long have you been like this?" "3 days," Grace managed to croak. "Getting worse." "Why did you not say something sooner, Mrs. Henderson demanded, though her tone held more worry than anger. "You foolish girl, you cannot just suffer through something like this alone." "Could not afford the doctor," Grace admitted, shame coloring her words. "Still cannot." Mrs. Henderson's expression softened, and she sighed heavily. Well, we cannot leave you like this. Let me help you back to bed and I will send someone for Doc Morrison. She paused, then added reluctantly, We will work something out about the payment. Grace wanted to protest, wanted to maintain some shred of dignity and independence, but another violent coughing spell stole her breath and her pride. She let Mrs. Henderson help her back onto the narrow bed, every movement agony. Once she was settled, the landlady pulled the thin sheet up over her and hurried from the room, her footsteps heavy on the stairs. Time became strange after that. Grace drifted in and out of feverish dreams where her father was alive again, calling her home for supper. Then she was a child, running through fields that seemed to stretch forever under an impossibly blue sky. The dreams fractured and reformed, sometimes pleasant, sometimes terrifying, always tinged with the relentless burning of fever. She surfaced briefly to the sound of voices, low and concerned. Someone was lifting her head, pressing a cup to her lips. Water, blessedly cool, trickled into her parched mouth, though she could barely swallow. More voices, words she could not quite catch. Then darkness again, pulling her down like a river current. When awareness returned once more, afternoon light slanted through her window, turned golden by the dusty glass. Grace blinked slowly, trying to orient herself. A man sat in the chair beside her bed, a stranger with a face weathered by sun and wind. He could not have been much older than 30, with brown hair that needed cutting and sharp blue eyes that studied her with unmistakable concern. He wore the rough clothes of a working cowboy, denim pants dusty from riding and a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned, muscular forearms. "You are awake," he said, his voice a low rumble that somehow felt steadying. "Good. You had us worried there for a while." Grace tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. The cowboy seemed to understand. He reached for the pitcher on her nightstand, poured water into a cup with steady hands and helped her drink. His touch was gentle despite the obvious strength in those calloused hands. "Who are you?" Grace finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Name is Harrison Hayes," he replied. "I was downstairs when Mrs. Henderson came running down saying she needed someone to fetch the doctor. I offered to help." "That was kind," Grace said weakly. "Thank you." Harrison shook his head. "No thanks needed. Anyone would do the same." But Grace knew that was not true. In her experience, people in frontier towns looked after their own interests first. Strangers rarely went out of their way to help, especially not for someone like her, with no money and no connections. "Did the doctor come?" she asked. Something flickered across Harrison's face then, an expression Grace could not quite read. "He did. Examined you pretty thoroughly. Said you have a serious lung infection, probably from breathing in too much dust during the sandstorms we had last week. Said it could turn to pneumonia if it is not treated properly." He paused, then continued, "He left medicine, instructions on how to care for you." Relief flooded through Grace, followed immediately by dread. "How much do I owe him?" Harrison was quiet for a moment, his blue eyes steady on her face. "Nothing. It is taken care of." Grace struggled to sit up, panic giving her a burst of strength. "What do you mean it is taken care of? Who paid?" "Mrs. Henderson." "I cannot let her do that. I already owe her for rent, and it was not Mrs. Henderson," Harrison interrupted gently, placing a hand on her shoulder to keep her from rising further. "I paid the doctor." The words hung in the air between them. Grace stared at him, comprehension slowly dawning. "You? But you do not even know me. Why would you do that?" Harrison's expression remained calm, though something in his eyes suggested the question made him uncomfortable. "Let us just say I know what it is like to be in a tough spot with nowhere to turn. Someone helped me once when I needed it. Figured I would pass along the favor." Tears pricked at Grace's eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. She had cried enough these past few days. "I will pay you back, every cent. It might take time, but I swear I will repay you." "We can talk about that when you are better," Harrison said. "Right now, you need to focus on getting well. Doc Morrison said you need to take this medicine 3 times a day, drink plenty of water, and rest." He gestured to a brown bottle on the nightstand. "I told him I would make sure you followed his orders." Grace frowned, confusion cutting through her fever haze. "You told him what? I do not understand." Harrison shifted in his chair, looking almost sheepish. "Well, I figured Mrs. Henderson has an entire boarding house to run. She cannot be coming up here every few hours to make sure you are taking your medicine and drinking water. And you are clearly in no condition to take care of yourself right now. So I told the doctor I would stay and help until you are back on your feet." "You cannot do that," Grace protested weakly. "You have your own work, your own life. You cannot just put everything aside to care for a complete stranger." "Already cleared it with my boss," Harrison replied with a slight shrug. "I work at the Double R Ranch outside town. Been working there for 5 years now. Never missed a day. Never caused trouble. When I explained the situation, the foreman said I could take a few days. We are between cattle drives right now anyway." Grace wanted to argue further, wanted to insist that she could manage on her own, but deep down she knew it was not true. She could barely lift her head from the pillow. The thought of someone staying to help, of not facing this illness alone in a strange town, filled her with both gratitude and shame. She had always been independent, had always taken care of herself. Accepting charity went against every instinct she had. But as another coughing fit racked her body, Grace realized she had no choice. Pride was a luxury she could not afford right now. "Thank you," she whispered when the coughing subsided. "I do not know what else to say." "No need to say anything," Harrison replied. He poured another measure of the dark medicine into a spoon. "Now, let us get this into you. Doctor said it tastes awful, but it will help break the fever." He was right about the taste. The medicine was bitter and thick, making Grace grimace as she swallowed it. But Harrison was there with water immediately, helping wash away the worst of the flavor. His movements were efficient but gentle, suggesting experience with caring for sick people. "You have done this before," Grace observed. Harrison nodded, his expression growing distant. "My mother was sick for a long time before she passed. I helped care for her." He did not elaborate, and Grace did not press. Some memories were too painful to share with strangers. The afternoon wore on, the light through the window shifting from gold to amber to the deep orange of approaching sunset. Harrison stayed beside her bed the entire time, reading from a worn copy of the Pecos newspaper he had brought with him. Sometimes Grace slept, but even in sleep she was aware of his presence, a steady reassurance that she was not alone. When darkness fell, Mrs. Henderson brought up a tray with soup and bread. She paused in the doorway, taking in the scene with an unreadable expression. "You are still here, Mr. Hayes," she said. "Yes, madam. Told you I would be." Mrs. Henderson set the tray down and turned to Grace. "How are you feeling, dear?" "A little better, I think," Grace replied truthfully. The medicine seemed to be helping already. Her fever felt slightly lower and breathing came a bit easier. "Good." Mrs. Henderson straightened, smoothing her apron. "Mr. Hayes, I have set up a cot for you in the room next door. It is empty right now. I assume you will want to be close enough to hear if Miss Caldwell needs anything during the night." "That would be appreciated, madam. Thank you." The landlady nodded and headed for the door, then paused. "You are a good man, Mr. Hayes. We need more like you in this town." Before Harrison could respond, she was gone, her footsteps fading down the hallway. Harrison helped Grace eat some of the soup, though her appetite was poor. She managed a few spoonfuls before exhaustion claimed her again. She was vaguely aware of Harrison settling her back against the pillows, of him saying something about being in the next room if she needed him. But sleep dragged her under before she could respond. The night brought fever dreams again, but this time they were different, less frightening. In her dreams, she was not alone. Someone was there in the darkness, a steady presence keeping the worst of the nightmares at bay. Once, she woke coughing so violently she thought she might be sick. Immediately, Harrison was there, appearing in her doorway like a guardian summoned by her distress. He brought water, held her steady until the coughing passed, and did not leave until she had drifted back to sleep. Morning light woke her, sunshine streaming through the window with cheerful disregard for her illness. Grace blinked slowly, taking stock of her condition. The fever had broken sometime during the night. Her nightgown was soaked with sweat, but her head felt clearer than it had in days. Her body still ached, and her chest felt tight when she breathed, but the terrifying sense of being consumed by fire had faded. Harrison sat in the chair beside her bed again, though whether he had been there all night or had just arrived, she could not tell. His hair was damp, suggesting he had washed at the basin and he had changed into a clean shirt. "Morning," he said when he noticed her watching him. "You look better." "Fever broke around 3 in the morning. You were checking on me during the night," Grace said. "It was not a question." "Every few hours, like the doctor ordered." Harrison poured fresh water from the pitcher. "How do you feel?" "Weak, but better." Grace accepted the water gratefully. "Thank you." "For everything." "Already told you, no thanks needed." But he smiled as he said it, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered face and made him look younger. The next few days followed a similar pattern. Harrison stayed close, making sure Grace took her medicine on schedule, bringing her meals, helping her when she needed to move around the room. Mrs. Henderson checked in regularly. Her initial skepticism about having a man staying on the women's floor, apparently overridden by her relief that someone was taking proper care of her sick tenant. As Grace's strength slowly returned, she found herself looking forward to Harrison's presence in a way that went beyond simple gratitude. He was easy to talk to, with a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard. Between medicine doses and meals, they talked about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up on a small ranch in Oklahoma, about how his father died when he was 15, leaving him to run the place with his mother until she got sick. After her death, he had sold the ranch and drifted, working cattle drives and ranch jobs throughout Texas before settling in Pecos. Grace, in turn, told him about her childhood on her father's farm, about the years after her mother died when it was just her and her father against the world. She spoke of his death, of losing the farm, of the terrifying uncertainty of finding herself alone in Pecos with nothing but her sewing skills to keep her fed and housed. "You are stronger than you think," Harrison said after listening to her story. "Not many people could start over the way you did." "I did not have much choice," Grace replied. "It was start over or give up, and I am too stubborn to give up." Harrison's smile widened. "I noticed that about you. The stubborn part, I mean. You tried to get out of bed and work yesterday even though you could barely stand." Grace felt her cheeks flush, though whether from embarrassment or the lingering fever, she could not say. "I do not like feeling useless, and I have customers waiting for their orders. Mrs. Patterson has probably told half the town that I am unreliable. Mrs. Patterson can wait. Your health is more important than her new dress." By the 4th day of Harrison's care, Grace was well enough to sit up in bed without assistance. Her appetite had returned, and the coughing, while still present, had lost its violent intensity. The medicine was working, and Doc Morrison, who stopped by to check on her, proclaimed her on the road to recovery. Keep taking the medicine for another week, the doctor instructed. And no heavy work for at least 2 weeks after that. Your lungs need time to fully heal. He turned to Harrison. You have done an excellent job caring for her, Mr. Hayes. Most patients with infections this serious do not recover so quickly. After the doctor left, Grace found herself alone with Harrison in the quiet afternoon. Sunlight pooled on the worn floorboards, and somewhere outside, children laughed as they played in the street. You will be going back to the ranch soon, Grace said, trying to keep her voice neutral even as something in her chest tightened at the thought. She had grown accustomed to his presence, to the comfort of knowing someone cared enough to stay. Harrison was quiet for a long moment. I should, he admitted. The foreman has been generous, but I have work responsibilities. Of course. And I am well enough now to manage on my own. The words felt hollow even as Grace spoke them. Grace. The way Harrison said her name made her look up, meeting his blue eyes directly. These past few days, taking care of you, talking with you, I want you to know it has not been a burden. It has been, he paused, seeming to search for the right words. It has been the best few days I have had in a long time. Grace's heart began to beat faster. For me as well, she said softly. Harrison leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze intent on her face. I know this is probably not the right time to say this, with you still recovering and all. But I cannot shake the feeling that meeting you, being here with you, it means something. I do not believe in accidents. I think I was downstairs that morning for a reason. What are you saying? Grace whispered, almost afraid to hear his answer. I am saying that I would like to keep seeing you. After you are well, I mean, if you would want that too. Joy bloomed in Grace's chest, bright and unexpected. I would want that very much. Harrison's smile was like sunrise, chasing away shadows. Good. That is good. He reached out and Grace placed her hand in his, marveling at how natural it felt, how right. They talked long into the evening that day about hopes and dreams and the possibility of building something real together. Harrison had been alone since his mother's death, drifting from job to job, never putting down roots. Grace had felt adrift as well, unmoored by loss and circumstance. But together, perhaps they could create the stability and home they both craved. Harrison returned to the ranch the next day, but he came back to visit Grace every evening after work. He would arrive dusty and tired from a full day of riding and ranch work, but his face would light up when he saw her, making her feel more valued than she had in years. Grace continued to recover, growing stronger each day. Within a week, she was back at her sewing, though she took care not to overdo it as the doctor had warned. Mrs. Henderson had been understanding about the late orders, and Grace's customers, once they heard about her illness, were generally forgiving of the delays. Harrison's visits became the highlight of Grace's days. They would sit in Mrs. Henderson's parlor, talking and laughing, sometimes playing cards or reading together. The landlady watched them with thinly veiled approval, occasionally commenting that it was nice to see young people finding happiness together. As summer gave way to fall, the relationship between Grace and Harrison deepened. He courted her properly, taking her to church socials and town dances when her strength permitted. He introduced her to his friends from the ranch, good men who treated her with respect and welcomed her into their circle. Grace, in turn, felt herself falling in love with Harrison in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. She had never expected to find this kind of connection, especially not in the midst of hardship and illness. One cool October evening, as they sat on the porch of the boarding house watching the sun set over Pecos, Harrison took Grace's hand in his. I have been thinking, he began, his voice serious, about the future. Grace's heart skipped. What about the future? Harrison turned to face her fully, his blue eyes intense in the fading light. "I want to build something permanent, Grace. A real home, a real life. With you, if you will have me." "Harrison, let me finish," he interrupted gently. "I know I am just a ranch hand. I do not have much money saved and I cannot offer you luxury. But I am a hard worker, and I would spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you are happy and cared for." "I love you, Grace Caldwell. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Grace's cheeks, but they were happy tears this time. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you too." Harrison pulled her into his arms, holding her close as if she were something precious and fragile. Grace pressed her face against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and felt a profound sense of coming home. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church at the center of Pecos. It was a simple ceremony, attended by Mrs. Henderson, the ranch hands from the Double R, and several of Grace's sewing customers who had become friends. Grace wore a dress she had made herself from cream-colored cotton, and Harrison wore his best suit, which he admitted he had not worn since his mother's funeral. The preacher spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through good times and hard times. And when Harrison kissed Grace as his wife, she felt that every hardship she had endured had been worth it to arrive at this moment. Harrison had been saving his wages for years, and together with Grace's modest savings, they had enough to rent a small house on the outskirts of Pecos. It was not much, just 3 rooms and a kitchen, but it was theirs. Grace hung curtains she had sewn in the windows and planted herbs in the small garden patch. Harrison built furniture from rough lumber, a table and chairs, a bed frame, shelves for their few books. They filled the house with love and laughter, creating a sanctuary from the harsh realities of frontier life. Harrison continued working at the Double R Ranch, and Grace kept taking sewing orders, though now she worked from their home rather than her rented room. The money was still tight, but they managed, and more importantly, they were happy. Grace would pack Harrison a lunch each morning and kiss him goodbye, then spend her days working on her sewing projects, always with one eye on the window, watching for his return. Winter came to Pecos, bringing cold winds that rattled the windows and occasional light snow that dusted the brown landscape white. Harrison made sure they had plenty of firewood stocked, and on particularly cold nights, he and Grace would sit close to the stove, reading or talking or simply enjoying each other's presence. On one such night, as wind howled outside and Grace sat mending one of Harrison's work shirts, he suddenly spoke from his chair across from her. "I have been thinking about something," he said. Grace looked up from her mending. "What is it?" "The foreman at the Double R is getting old. Talking about retiring in a year or two. The ranch owner, Mr. Roberts, mentioned to me the other day that he is looking for someone reliable to train for the position." Harrison paused, his expression cautious. "He offered it to me." Grace's eyes widened. "Harrison, that is wonderful. Being foreman would mean better pay, more stability. It would mean long hours too," Harrison cautioned. "More responsibility. I wanted to make sure you would be all right with that before I gave Mr. Roberts an answer." Grace set down her mending and crossed to Harrison's chair, kneeling beside it so she could look directly into his eyes. "I want you to take the position. You work harder than anyone I know, and you deserve this opportunity. We will make it work, whatever it takes." Harrison pulled her into his lap, holding her close. "What did I do to deserve you? You stayed by my side when I needed someone most," Grace replied softly. "You gave me a second chance at life, at happiness. I will never forget that." Harrison accepted the foreman training position, and over the next year, he learned every aspect of managing the Double R Ranch. It was hard work that often kept him away from dawn until well after dark, but he approached it with the same steady dedication he brought to everything. Grace supported him however she could, making sure he had hot meals and clean clothes, listening when he needed to talk through problems, celebrating his successes. As spring arrived and brought new life to the Texas landscape, Grace discovered she was carrying their first child. The news filled Harrison with joy so profound he could barely speak when she told him. He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach, his eyes shining with wonder and a hint of fear. "I am going to be a father," he whispered, as if saying it aloud would make it real. "You are going to be a wonderful father," Grace assured him. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the warm summer months. Grace continued her sewing work as long as she was able, knowing they would need every penny once the baby arrived. Harrison, true to his nature, worried constantly about her health, remembering how sick she had been when they first met. But Grace stayed strong and healthy, blooming with the pregnancy in a way that made her glow with happiness. In November, as the weather began to cool again, Grace went into labor. Mrs. Henderson, who had become a good friend over the past year, came to help, as did Mrs. Patterson, the customer who had once complained about delayed orders but who had since become one of Grace's staunchest supporters in Pecos. Harrison paced the small house like a caged animal, terrified and useless, as the women tended to his wife. When Grace's cries of pain reached him through the bedroom door, he wanted to burst in and somehow take her suffering on himself. But Mrs. Henderson shooed him away every time he tried, insisting that childbirth was women's work and he would only be in the way. After what felt like an eternity but was actually only 6 hours, a baby's cry pierced the air. Harrison froze, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. The bedroom door opened and Mrs. Henderson emerged, smiling broadly. "You have a son, Mr. Hayes. A healthy, strong boy, and your wife is doing fine." Harrison rushed past her into the bedroom. Grace lay propped up on pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. When she looked up at Harrison, her eyes were filled with so much love it took his breath away. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Harrison approached slowly, almost reverently. Grace pulled back the blanket to reveal a small, red-faced baby with a shock of dark hair. The infant's eyes were squeezed shut, and his tiny fists waved in the air as if fighting invisible battles. "He is perfect," Harrison breathed. "You are both perfect." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, and Grace placed the baby in his arms. Harrison held his son with the same gentle care he had shown Grace during her illness, marveling at how something so small could already mean everything. They named him Henry Hayes, after Harrison's father. Little Henry proved to be a good baby, healthy and strong like his mother. Harrison threw himself into fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to everything else in his life. He would come home from long days at the ranch and immediately take Henry from Grace, insisting she rest while he walked the baby around their small house, talking to him about his day and all the things they would do together as Henry grew. When the old foreman finally retired 6 months after Henry's birth, Mr. Roberts officially promoted Harrison to the position. The increased pay meant they could afford small luxuries now, things Grace had not dared dream of during those desperate days when she lay fevered and alone in Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. They could buy better food, new clothes for Henry, save for the future. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Harrison managed the Double R Ranch with skill and fairness, earning the respect of the men who worked under him. Grace's sewing business continued to thrive as word spread about the quality of her work. And little Henry grew strong and healthy, learning to crawl and then walk, filling their house with laughter and chaos. On their second wedding anniversary, Harrison surprised Grace with a gift. It was not large or expensive, but it made her cry nonetheless. He handed her a small wooden box he had carved himself, decorated with careful scrollwork. "Open it," he urged. Inside, Grace found a stack of bills, more money than she had seen in one place in her entire life. "Harrison, what is this?" "It is the money I spent on the doctor when you were sick," he explained. "You said you would pay me back, remember? Well, you have. Every penny with interest, through your love, your support, your partnership. You have given me more than I ever imagined having. A home, a family, a purpose. So this money, it is yours now, our nest egg for the future." Grace threw her arms around his neck, overwhelmed. "I do not deserve you." "We deserve each other," Harrison corrected. "We both came from hard places, Grace. We both knew loss and loneliness. But we found each other and we built something good. That is what matters." As the years passed, the Hayes family continued to grow and prosper. Grace gave birth to a daughter they named Georgia when Henry was 3 years old. Then another son, Harold, arrived 2 years after Georgia. Their small house became too cramped, so Harrison used their savings to buy land and build a larger home, a proper house with enough room for their growing family. Harrison's position as foreman became permanent, and under his management, the Double R Ranch thrived. Mr. Roberts came to rely on Harrison completely, eventually offering him a partnership in the ranch. Harrison accepted, and suddenly he and Grace found themselves landowners, stakeholders in one of the most successful cattle operations in West Texas. But success never changed them. Harrison remained the same steady, hard-working man who had sat by Grace's bedside all those years ago, refusing to leave her side during her darkest hours. Grace stayed humble and kind, remembering what it felt like to lie sick and penniless, unable to afford medicine. They taught their children the value of hard work and compassion, of helping those in need regardless of whether you could expect repayment. Henry grew into a strong, responsible young man who shared his father's skill with horses and cattle. Georgia inherited her mother's eye for beauty and detail, showing early talent for sewing and design. Harold, the youngest, had a mischievous streak that kept his parents on their toes, but he also possessed a generous heart that reminded Grace of Harrison. As Harrison and Grace's 15th wedding anniversary approached, they stood together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Their children played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. In the distance, cattle grazed on land that belonged to them, secured through hard work and dedication. "You ever think about that day?" Grace asked quietly. "The day you came upstairs to my room at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house." Harrison slipped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "All the time. It was the day my real life began. You saved my life that day," Grace said. "I have never properly thanked you for that." Harrison turned to face her, his blue eyes as intense as they had been that day 15 years ago. "You have thanked me every day since. By being my wife, by building this life with me, by loving me even when things were hard. That is all the thanks I ever needed." Grace leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the same sense of peace and belonging she had felt the first time Harrison held her hand. "I was so scared that day. Scared of dying, scared of being alone. And then you appeared, like an answer to a prayer I did not even know I was praying." "I was lost before I met you," Harrison admitted. "I did not realize it at the time, but I was just drifting, going through the motions. You gave me purpose, Grace. You gave me a reason to work hard, to build something lasting. You gave me a home." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the sky darkened and stars began to appear. Inside, they could hear Mrs. Henderson, who had come for dinner, getting the children ready for bed. The older woman had become like a grandmother to Henry, Georgia, and Harold, a permanent fixture in the Hayes family life. "Mama, Papa," Georgia's voice called from inside. "Grandma Henderson says it is time for the cake." Grace and Harrison exchanged smiles. Mrs. Henderson had insisted on baking a special cake for their anniversary, refusing to hear any protests. They went inside together, Harrison's hand warm in Grace's, to find the dining table set with their good dishes, and a beautiful cake decorated with careful icing work. "This is too much," Grace protested, though her eyes shone with appreciation. "Nonsense," Mrs. Henderson replied firmly. "You two are special to me. You were the first couple I ever witnessed fall in love right under my roof. I knew from the start you were meant for each other." "You did?" Harrison asked, surprised. Mrs. Henderson nodded. "The way you looked at her, even that first day when she was so ill, like she was the most precious thing in the world, and Grace, even burning up with fever, I could see something change in her eyes when you were there. Recognition, maybe. Or relief. I am an old woman, and I have seen a lot in my years. I know real love when I see it." They celebrated late into the evening, their house filled with warmth and joy, and the certainty that came from building a life on a foundation of genuine love and mutual respect. Later, after the children were asleep and Mrs. Henderson had been driven home in their wagon, Harrison and Grace prepared for bed in the comfortable routine of long marriage. "You have any regrets?" Grace asked as she brushed out her long hair, still as dark as the day they met, though now with a few silver threads woven through. Harrison considered the question seriously. "Only one," he finally said. Grace's hand stilled and she met his eyes in the mirror. "What is it?" "I regret that you had to suffer through that fever at all. I wish I had met you before you got sick, that I could have saved you from that pain." Grace set down her brush and turned to face him. "But if things had happened differently, we might never have met. That illness, terrible as it was, brought us together. I would endure it all again, 10 times over, if it meant finding you at the end of it." Harrison crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. "You are far braver than I am, then. Because the thought of you suffering, even in the past, still makes my heart ache." "Then let me ease your heart," Grace murmured, reaching up to touch his face. "I am here, healthy and whole, because you refused to let me face that darkness alone. You paid for my medicine when you did not have to. You stayed by my side when you could have walked away. You chose me, Harrison, when I had nothing to offer but gratitude and hope. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Harrison corrected. He kissed her then, tender and sweet, a reaffirmation of vows spoken 15 years ago and kept faithfully every day since. The years continued to unfold, bringing new challenges and new joys. The children grew, each finding their own path in the world. Henry took over more and more of the ranch responsibilities as Harrison aged, showing the same dedication and skill his father possessed. Georgia married a kind man who owned the general store in Pecos and started a family of her own. Harold surprised everyone by showing an aptitude for numbers and becoming the ranch's bookkeeper, managing the financial side of the operation with impressive skill. Harrison and Grace grew old together, their hair turning silver, their faces creasing with lines earned through years of hard work and frequent laughter. But their love never dimmed. If anything, it deepened with time, becoming something solid and unshakable, a certainty they could both rely on no matter what else might change. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the Hayes Ranch for a massive celebration. Children and grandchildren filled the house to bursting. Mrs. Henderson, now in her 80s and somewhat frail, sat in the place of honor, presiding over the festivities like a benevolent queen. As the party wound down and the grandchildren were tucked into various beds throughout the house, Harrison found Grace standing on their porch, looking out over the land they had built their life upon. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, joining her. "Everything," Grace replied. "The whole journey from that terrible day when I thought I might die alone to this moment, surrounded by family and love. It seems impossible sometimes that this is my life." "It is our life," Harrison corrected gently. "We built it together." Grace turned to him, her eyes still bright despite her age. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day, when I asked why you would help a stranger?" Harrison thought back across the decades. "I said someone helped me once when I needed it, and I was passing along the favor." "You gave me so much more than a favor," Grace said softly. "You gave me everything." Harrison took her hand, the gesture as natural now as breathing after 30 years of marriage. "We saved each other, Grace. I was as lost and alone as you were, just too stubborn to admit it. You gave my life meaning and purpose. You gave me a family, a home, a reason to wake up grateful every single morning. If I paid for that doctor's visit 1,000 times over, it still would not be enough to repay what you have given me." They stood together in the darkness, listening to the sounds of their family settling down for the night inside the house they had built with their own hands. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly, and a coyote called to the moon. The wind carried the scent of sage and dust, the smell of Texas that had become home. "I love you, Harrison Hayes," Grace said, the same words she had spoken on their wedding day 3 decades ago. "I love you, Grace Hayes," Harrison replied. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after. Until my last breath and beyond." They went inside together, to the bedroom where they had shared joy and sorrow, passion and comfort, all the moments that accumulated into a life well lived. And as they prepared for sleep, secure in their love and surrounded by the evidence of everything they had built together, both gave thanks for the blessing of finding each other in the harsh landscape of the West Texas frontier. Years later, when Henry took over the ranch completely and Harrison finally retired from daily work, Grace and Harrison had time to simply enjoy each other's company. They would sit on their porch for hours, sometimes talking, sometimes simply being together in comfortable silence. Grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren came to visit, and Harrison and Grace would tell them stories of the old days, of how the West was won through hard work and determination. But Grace's favorite story to tell was always the same one. The story of how she lay burning with fever, unable to afford medicine, and how a cowboy with kind eyes and a generous heart had paid the doctor and refused to leave her side. How that act of compassion had bloomed into love, and how that love had sustained them through 3 decades of marriage, through hardship and triumph, through loss and joy. "The greatest gift anyone can give," Grace would tell her grandchildren, "is the gift of presence. Your grandfather gave me that when I needed it most. He showed me I was worth staying for, worth caring about, and that gift changed everything." Harrison would usually add his own coda to the story. "And your grandmother taught me what it means to truly live. Before Grace, I was just surviving, going through the motions. She showed me how to build a real life, full of love and purpose. She was worth every penny I spent on that doctor, and worth every moment I spent by her bedside. Best investment I ever made." The children would giggle at the word investment applied to love, but the older ones understood. They saw the way their grandparents looked at each other even after so many years, the gentle touches and shared smiles, the complete comfort and trust they had in each other. That kind of love, built on a foundation of sacrifice and sustained by daily choice and commitment, was rare and precious. When Harrison was 75 and Grace was 70, he fell ill himself. It was his heart, the doctor said, worn out from decades of hard physical labor. There was not much to be done except rest and wait, though everyone knew what they were waiting for. Grace refused to leave his side, just as he had refused to leave hers all those years ago. She sat by his bed day and night, holding his hand, talking to him about their life together, reminding him of all the beautiful moments they had shared. "I am not ready to let you go," she admitted one evening when it was just the two of them. Harrison squeezed her hand weakly. "I know. I am not ready to leave either. But Grace, listen to me. You gave me the most wonderful life any man could ask for. 35 years of marriage to you, 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and now 4 great-grandchildren. I got to build something lasting, something that will continue after I am gone. Not everyone gets that gift." Tears streamed down Grace's face. "It will not be the same without you." "No," Harrison agreed. "But you are strong, Grace. Stronger than you give yourself credit for. You survived that fever when the odds were against you. You built a successful business with nothing but thread and determination. You raised 3 good children who became fine adults. You have decades of life left in you, and I need you to live them fully, for both of us." "I do not know how to be without you," Grace whispered. Harrison pulled her down gently so her head rested on his chest, where she could hear his laboring heartbeat. "You carry me with you always. In every choice you made, in our children and grandchildren, in this ranch we built together. I am not really leaving, Grace. I am just going on ahead. We will meet again, I promise you that." Harrison Hayes died peacefully 3 days later, surrounded by his family, with Grace's hand in his until his final breath. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Pecos, a testament to the respect and affection the community held for the man who had spent his life working hard and treating everyone fairly. Grace grieved deeply, but she honored Harrison's request. She continued living fully, staying active in the ranch management alongside Henry, spending time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, maintaining the home they had built together. She found comfort in routine, in work, in family. But she also found comfort in memory, in sitting on their porch and feeling Harrison's presence beside her, as real as it had been when he was alive. She lived another 12 years without him, years filled with both joy and the persistent ache of missing her partner. She saw 2 more great-grandchildren born, saw the ranch expand and prosper under Henry's management, saw George's children marry and start families of their own. She watched the turn of the century come, bringing automobiles and telephones to Pecos, marveling at how much the world had changed since that terrible, wonderful day in 1878, when a cowboy paid for her medicine and stayed by her side. When Grace finally died at the age of 82, peacefully in her sleep, her family found her with a smile on her face. On her nightstand was a small wooden box carved with scrollwork, the same box Harrison had given her on their 2nd anniversary. Inside were saved mementos of their life together: their marriage certificate, locks of baby hair from each of their children, pressed flowers from various anniversaries, and a folded piece of paper with Harrison's handwriting. Henry opened the paper and read it aloud to his siblings. It was a note Harrison had written years before he died, placed in the box for Grace to find later. "My dearest Grace," it read, "if you are reading this, then I have gone before you and you are alone. I am sorry for that, my love. I wanted to stay with you forever. But please remember, every morning of our marriage I woke up grateful. Grateful for that day I found you sick and alone. Grateful I had the means to help. Grateful you let me stay. Grateful you chose to build a life with me. You made me the happiest man who ever lived. Wait for me, my darling. I will be watching from wherever I am, so very proud of the woman you have always been, so very grateful I got to be your husband. Until we meet again, carry my love with you. It is yours forever. Harrison. Through tears, the children smiled. That was their parents, love distilled into its purest form, sustained by gratitude and choice and steadfast commitment. They buried Grace next to Harrison in the cemetery on the hill overlooking Pecos. The tombstone was simple but profound. Harrison and Grace Hayes. Two souls who found each other when it mattered most. Together again for all eternity. The ranch continued to thrive through generations of Hayes descendants. Each one taught the story of their great-great-grandparents, of how love and compassion could transform lives, of how a single act of kindness could echo through decades, creating ripples that touched countless lives. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew across the Texas plains and the sun set in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, ranch hands would sometimes swear they could see two figures standing on the porch of the old house, holding hands and watching over the land they had built together, their love as enduring and eternal as the endless western sky.